Welcome to another episode of Tech Tuesday. I know a lot of you are thinking, uh-oh, what happened to Abby? Did she get fired? Am I on the wrong day? Nope, Abby didn't get fired. This is a special episode. We're giving her the week off. She will be back next week. Today, I'm talking with John Shafaee, with ALIS, with Medtelligent. We are going to be talking about data and data that can actually be used to change your organization. I'm really, really excited about this conversation. You will learn some things that will improve your bottom line if you stick with this. I promise you, money back, double your money back guarantee. But first, this. And that's why I had to do the double explanation about why it's not Abby this week. John, welcome so much. I've been really looking forward to this. We did a kickoff call a couple of weeks ago, and we started talking about data and how it can actually be used. It was in the context of the most recent NIC meeting and the NORC study about the effectiveness of senior living. And I'm really, really excited about getting into that. It's going to be the meat of our conversation. But first, let's actually talk about Medtelligence and ALIS and who you are and how you got started first.
Perfect, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Just a quick bit about me. I'm a software developer by trade. I'm the founder of Medtelligent. Most everybody knows us by our product, ALIS, and you will be very successful to just refer to us as ALIS. That being said, what is ALIS? It stands for Assisted Living Integrated Solution, and it is a electronic health record that was built for assisted living, memory care, independent living over the last, at this point, about 12, 13 years. We are in every state. We have several thousand clients, and our niche or focus is really assisted living. It's everything to do with assisted living operations, workflows, patterns, behaviors, and we see ourselves as an extension to our clients, who we call partners internally.
Cool. Well, we use the term partner as well, so we're a big fan of that because we do think that this is very much a collaborative effort to make the world better for people who live and work in senior living. You're in a fairly crowded space out there. Talk to me a little bit about why people are picking you rather than other platforms.
Yeah, great question. Early on, as a software developer, I want to just build stuff, right? And the problem with software companies is they keep putting out more and more features. But early on, we were blessed to have the right type of people in the company, and we identified that ease of use is actually a very, very important thing. So the software is built specifically, it's a bespoke application for assisted living, memory care, independent living. So first and foremost, we don't do home health, we don't do skilled nursing. We can go deep in the assisted living space. We can be very cognizant and cater to the fact that every state operates differently. Furthermore, we can go even deeper and say that every operator differentiates by their practices, right? So it is not right for us to tell them, change the way you do things to fit our software. Instead, we've built a business around being able to customize our software for their specific needs and let them differentiate, right? So those would be some of the tangible components of it. The other bits that are much harder to gauge from the outside are service. We literally, so first of all, you can't buy the solution without service. It just comes packed with it. It's not a line item you can say, I don't want. Second, we see ourselves as an extension of the operator or the community as an additional department. We want the buildings to call in. We want to continuously help the buildings train and bring new staff up to speed. And we get very, very engaged on all the details. Ultimately, that's how we find out where things could be better, but also where the opportunities at in terms of where we can deliver more value to the clients. And I sort of jokingly tell people that, to your comment about being a crowded space, it's absolutely true. We are an automobile as much of a Tesla is an automobile until you own one. And then you realize it's a computer on wheels.
Yeah. So I love this. So one of the things that I'm really so we went through this history when I first started doing this blog. There were 15 years ago, almost 15 years ago now, mostly people were doing things with pen and paper and pencil, and it was really hard to sort of know what to do. You did this stuff because it was super, super important from a regulatory standpoint. You had to do that. And then we started getting more sophisticated, and we started getting all of this data that we were collecting, and they were sitting in spreadsheets and other kinds of formats that only people like you would understand and I wouldn't. And but the challenge has really been, and now we got to the point where we've got lots of pretty dashboards, but one of the big concerns I really have, and I think that you're really leading the way on, is how do you actually take this data and turn it into something that can make your business better?
Yeah, very good point. Let me first sort of highlight that there are a lot of solutions out there for capturing that data. The
Right.
adoption rate of those solutions tends to be relatively low. So one thing to just kind of burst the bubble on is that there's a potential to capture even more data than we are today, but it's cumbersome. It's very difficult to kind of spend the time and sit there and put it into EHR. EHR fatigue is not just a thing with physicians and hospitals; it is a real life thing, right? So we got to keep that in mind. What's changing there is ambient technologies. More and more technologies going into the ambient to the ambience of the community. So you have smart beds, smart sensors. You've got door locks, right? And what's happening is those are now coming in as higher authoritative data around what is actually happening in the community, what's happening in the state of with the resident, and what's happening with operations, right? So that's kind of in the backdrop of all of this discussion. The shape of data and how data is being captured in the building is changing, and we shouldn't lose track of that. Now, the question is, how do you actually put that into practice? How do you get it to actually change your business? We're a business, and one of the things that I recognized is that if someone sends me a report, I'm informed, but that doesn't change the reality. In order for me to change realities, I have to change the person who this is being reported on or that the report came from. Well, me telling them to be different is one aspect of it, right? That's just me telling them to operate differently. How do you actually bring meaningful change at the place that it matters, right? So reporting is like halfway up the arc. The other half the arc is actually getting behavior to change in the community, in the front lines. And the best way to do that is really to inform the people that can make the change with the information that they need to be better, right? So I want to be very clear that reporting is still very important. Macro view on your business is still very important. And we've still not reached a place, at least from where I'm standing, where we've really perfected that. Right? We're still struggling to get those dashboards. We're still struggling to make sure that we have meaningful information coming up, that the information is accurate. But just assume for a second that we've got that kind of, at least somewhat under control and headed directionally in the right way. What we have not yet achieved as a market, as a group, is getting that information at the right time to the right people in a way that they can act on it. And just to kind of really nail that home, everyone talks about this idea that when a care aide walks into a room, it would be phenomenal if the smartphone kind of told them everything they need to know, right? And we're getting to a period where that actually is a reality. And I think that's where you're actually going to see lift. You're going to see change. The ultimate pattern here is arm the individuals who are interacting with the residents with the information they need to support them, because A, they will feel supported by the organization, and B, they actually can do something with the data.
So I think one of the big questions is, or maybe sort of two questions, is one is, how do you figure out which data is important? And maybe even a bigger question is, how do you figure out what to do with it? I'll give you a couple of examples. We spend a lot of time looking at traffic data to our website, traffic data to our social media platforms. But the big question really has to be, how do we actually, what is it, we can see whether it's up or down, but how do we use that to actually be better, to serve our audience better? Sort of along the same lines, we've more and more often we're hearing stories about some social media, TikTok or Instagram reel going viral to millions and millions of people. I've seen stuff like 8 and 10 million views, right? But does it actually really mean anything in terms of running the business? And so how do we get through all of that?
Well, one of the most interesting things about assisted living versus the example you highlighted around social media traffic and views on, let's say, content, is that you actually can go to the community and observe the patterns. So you literally have the opportunity to go to the building and notice that, hey, there's a pattern here, and then correlate the data that you're capturing from the building to those patterns. So you can ground them to some truths of what's actually happening, right? Then the next question becomes, what is the behavior that you want? What is the outcome that you want? And how does the data that you've captured based on the behavior you observe allow you to actually shape and get the outcomes that you're looking for? What would be the change? What would be the delta, right? And it is that delta that you then convert into actionable information delivered at the right time.
That I love this. Okay, so let's go into a practical example that we talked about earlier. As you know, in the fall, I guess spring actually, Nick came out with the study that Nick funded the study that NORC did that showed that looked. The question really was, does senior living make the lives of older people better? And the initial number was that it increased lifespan on average, by 8 days, which there was sort of, and that's, to me, it was kind of like, that sort of doesn't mean anything. I was a little surprised, honestly, that there was kind of so much excitement about it. But what was really exciting was that in the top 25%, they got a 2-month increase in length of stay and that is crazy good. The thing that the study didn't help with at all is what made the difference. And I do need to mention that conversely, the bottom 25, it was like 2 weeks, it was worse than living at home. So those people clearly have some more. But the question is, so we have all this information now, and you've got some data that would help figure that out, right?
Yeah, 100%. So if you permission to riff on length of stay for just a little bit.
Yes, please.
We are obsessed with it. Internally, it's a KPI that we track across our portfolio. It's how we determine whether we're being effective. Are we impacting length of stay in any way? So we are obsessed with it. With that being said, we did a study on length of stay, and I think there's some points here that are just worth kind of bringing to surface so that we can all kind of work with facts, right? Based on, over 12, 13 years of data across thousands of communities and looking at literally a ton of move outs. The first thing that I think is important to highlight is you should not ever talk about length of stay as an average. Just as in school, when you got one bad grade, it became very hard to recover from it. Averages are misleading. I think something that no one really talks about, but it's a lot more a lot more practical if you're trying to do anything with length of stay, is the median. What is the median length of stay, right? I'll still work with the average in this conversation, but I wanted to just kind of put that out there because a lot of times when I'm working with partners, they get tripped up on this, right? Averages are not stable. You'll have one person that'll stay a very long time, it'll throw your average up, making you think that you're doing really great, but in general, you're not. Second thing to know about length of stay is that something about like 28% of your residents will move out less than 90 days. 28%. Wow. 28% of your residents will move out. Yep. And almost 40% of your residents will move out in 180 days. I picked the 90 days because not only is it shocking, but it's very difficult to run a business when roughly a third of your clients haven't even covered the cost of the acquisition, right? Of actually getting them placed, right? So this short stays is a big issue within assisted living that a lot of folks are not looking at. And in terms of length of stay, being an EHR company, we look at the world as, you can either try to fill the beds as fast as possible, or you can try to keep the beds full as long as you can. And we're in the business of trying to do both and heavily focus on that latter, right? Is how do you keep those beds full? So the first piece is dealing with those short-term stays. Turns out that length of stay, in terms of correlation back to the communities, is 14% of that factor is those short-term stays. But I'll tell you this, do you know what that 53% factor is? 53% of the reason why your length of stay sways? You want
What's
to take
that?
a guess?
Length of stay, the number of, so I'm a little bit obsessed with the number of staff members because the CMS numbers just came out for nursing homes.
Sure.
So I'm guessing that has something to do with staffing.
You're spot on. It has absolutely something to do with staffing. And it actually is 53% of the reason why your length of stay moves up or down has to do with your staff tenure. Literally down to the day. No matter how many communities you look at, no matter how you plot it, if you plot your staff tenure and you compare that to your residents' length of stay, you'll see that those numbers are on top of each other every day, every month. Meaning, if you can get your staff members to stay with you, you create a culture, create an environment where your staff members stay with you an extra day, your residents will stay with you an extra day. If you want to get a lift on your length of stay, it is not this, forgive me for saying this, but this tired excuse that, look, it's the last home for individuals, that, a lot of folks pass away. That's true. But it turns out that you actually can impact the folks that don't. You can impact the folks that stay with you, and you can even impact the folks that are there with you today simply by looking at the staff tenure number as a valve.
So again, I'm going to come back to this idea that you've got to look at median. This is another place where I think median becomes much more important than average. A number of years ago, I sort of went round this with Nick about their average occupancy numbers, and I've always felt like that those numbers, they should be publishing medians as well as averages, and they actually the medians actually make the industry look much better, as it turns out, for the reasons you talked about. But I wanted to, so this idea of the longer I keep my staff, so all I have to do to solve my length of stay problem is to take care of my team members better.
I don't want to oversimplify it. It's not that easy, but believe it or not, if you focus on that lever, your length of stay will increase. That is guaranteed. And I can tell you across our base, that truth comes up over and over and over again. We have a new benchmark that we're using, that we've been using internally for many years, that we're going to be now making more public, called the ALIS 500. It's 500 communities, kind of like the S&P 500. We have our 500 communities to let people know what the broad range is of length of stay. And saying, hey, let's not use acuity mix or acuity distribution as an excuse as to why we can't increase our length of stay. Let's not get confused by the average age of individuals moving in, because human beings love to find real quick answers to puzzling problems, right? Why is my length of stay short and this other one's high when our buildings look very similar, even within the same portfolio? The one thing that it always comes back to is really the staff tenure. And it sort of makes sense intuitively when you walk it backwards. If I'm a resident living in a community, my strongest bond and relationship is going to be with the individual who is helping me bathe and use the restroom and things of that sort. And the comfort I have, the psychological safety, the physical safety that I have is tied to that individual. When you have an environment where that individual's swapping out, you're going to feel the turbulence of that as a person living there, right? You're not going to feel as safe. You're not going to feel as heard. You're not going to feel as understood. You're not going to feel a part of the community. You're going to feel disconnected. And that is our observation when you kind of work backwards and see how staff tenure is actually tied to length of stay.
So over the Thanksgiving holiday, I spent a little time with a Shirtdale family relative who'd been living in a senior living community for 7 years, and things had just kind of gone downhill. I mean, the cleanliness. I actually had lunch with him, and I wrote about it. The meal selection was pathetic. It was not. He had good reasons to move. But I'll tell you, the thing that really shocked me as I talked to him about it was that after living in this building for 7 years, he expressed no real regret of, I'm going to miss this caregiver, I'm going to miss this server, I'm going to miss, and I find myself thinking that if they'd been more relational with this guy, he would have put up with a ton more before he moved because it was his friends, and he didn't seem to care.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, people have choice, and sometimes you don't have a choice. And depending on your life situation, there's other factors at play. But by and large, you're going to hear 80% of your issues from 20% of your clients, 20% of the residents that live in the community. Question is, what's happening to the other 80%? How are they naturally selecting, right? How are they selecting to stay or move or go to a different environment? On top of that, the relationship, the staff tenure part of it has a clinical component to that as well, right? Meaning,
that's right.
If you have staff that have longer tenure, they will get to know the residents longer, and they'll be able to spot pattern changes and identify specific needs or changes in needs, right? In an environment where your staff tenure is low, that information is leaving the building, right? And the industry suffers with anywhere from 40 to 50%, depending on how you count it, staff turnover on an annual basis, right? It really is in many ways a crisis, and it's an unstable environment. So we've gotten ourselves wound up in this situation where everyone wants longer length of stay. Everyone assumes that it is staff wages and other things that are actually causing staff to leave. And the truth is, if you have an environment that is purpose-driven, I mean, assisted living, the best thing about it is it has purpose in the job. It is the reason why you work in that industry. In my, at least from where I'm standing, if you can capitalize on that and provide training, provide support, provide upward mobility, create an environment where the management actually cares and upskills the individuals, they will stay longer. They will provide better care. Residents will stay longer. You will see that in your bottom line. And to that point, I'll mention that because we're so obsessed with length of stay, we've got a solution that will work on any electronic health record, right? It will work with ALIS. It'll also work with PCC and Yardi and everything else. And what it does is it identifies residents at risk of move out. And we flag those residents, right? And we identify that, hey, this resident has had a change, and that change is correlated with a potential of moving out in the next 90 days. And the reason why I introduced this is I want to tell a story, a very quick story around why all this matters around staff tenure and management. What happened is we did a pilot. It's a brand new product. We did a pilot with a prominent operator that has over 100 properties. And we had one anecdotal story, a lot of anecdotal stories, but I'm going to tell one of them here. What happened is we flagged a resident in, I think it was, a resident ended up had a fall and ended up going to the hospital in November. Throughout December, they were in the community and part of our proof of concept. In January, we flagged a resident at risk of move out. And what happened is that flag went to the regional operations folks. The regional operations folks brought that to their high-risk meetings that happens weekly at that building for this one individual and asked, hey, why is this individual being flagged? The move-out predictor from ALIS is highlighting that this individual is having excessive pain meds. What about their chart says they need pain meds? What's the source of pain? And the community said, well, you know what? That's just always how she is. She's always kind of had chronic pain, and there's nothing abnormal here. The regional asked to have this individual looked at closer. And long story short, they found a hairline fracture on this person's hip. So this person was actually taking pain meds to deal with a very large underlying problem that they had from a fall that they had in November, right? And if you take technology, take our bits out of the picture for a second, the two observations that I make is that if individuals were intimate with that person, they would have had the same feel. They would say, Mrs. Smith, and using a phone name here, Mrs. Smith doesn't usually take pain meds. What's going on? Why is it all of a sudden that her need for pain meds has gone up over time? Someone could potentially catch that. The second thing that I'll highlight is that the buildings are short-staffed. They're in a position where they're dealing with higher acuity. It's very difficult to stay in the weeds and on top of it at the same time. But the regional folks are not getting their own independent information of the risk in the building and what's happening. It's too complex of a problem to solve. So we get into this complacent situation where we're looking for people that have had a pattern of falls or a pattern of behaviors. And that's how we're flagging at-risk residents, when it's far more complex than that. So anyways, that's my plug for why it's very, very important to invest on the clinical and the operation side of the business. It really does impact length of stay, resident quality, resident experience, and that all translates to NOI. It translates to higher occupancy, and we see it left and right. And incidentally, with that study, we managed to increase length of stay by about 66 days in the communities that we operated in.
Wow. So we don't have a lot of time. We are going to run a little bit over here, I think, because I've got too much stuff I want to talk about before we're done. But the first question I have is, and you've sort of alluded to some of it, but these communities that have longer length of stays for their team members, where they're not seeing the turnover staff, what is it that they're doing different? I know you can't write a whole book in 2 minutes, but just sort of give me some high level things that people can be thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we talk to them, when we engage with them, staff programs and staff programming is front and center. They're actively investing in upskilling, in making sure every individual gets a one-on-one on a monthly basis where they're heard. There is a path for growth. There are programs where if someone is coming in as a care aide but maybe has culinary aspirations, there's a pathway to kind of get there within the organization. It is really just generating focus on the individuals and creating an environment that is healthy and values-oriented, value-based, and really leveraging the fact that they're all there with a common purpose, which is to help the residents out and provide an environment where it does feel like a community where people are cared for.
I love that. So the second question I want to touch bases on is this. I'm still sort of reeling from what was the number you gave me? 28% move out in the first 90 days.
That's right.
Why do they move out, and does your tool help with this?
Very, very good question. We can at least identify who's at risk in that 28 days. Anyone who's in that first 90 days in terms of who's moved in.
Yeah, the first 90 days. Yeah.
But it really is an adjustment period. Just imagine when you move houses, how long does it take for you to put everything out of your box in just the right place and kind of get everything just the way you like, right? In that first 90 days, people are still adjusting. And if the environment is not really set up to help that individual adjust properly and at their timetable, then that's where things go awry, right? In a couple of the deep dives that we've done, things as basic as feeling safe in the environment is the starting point. People don't feel safe. If they don't feel safe, they don't come out of their rooms. If they don't come out of their rooms, they are not being an active member of the community. And in communities that are 65, 70, 85 residents, it's very, very difficult to spot those small issues. It'll come up in terms of service complaints. People don't pay attention to me, or this is not a good fit for me, right? So a lot of at least the advice that I give to the folks we work with is put an active program around folks that have moved in that adjustment period, in that 90 days. Get a KPI in place, because if literally, I'll give you this stat too. But by the way, just in general, we have this length of stay study that we would be happy to publish and kind of make available. I've been sharing it with folks, but you can see the stats for yourself. But the statistics on this is that if you can get the resident stay 91 days, 1 day extra, their likelihood to stay with you goes for a year goes up by about 83%.
Wow.
So you just got to shepherd them through that 90-day period. Now I make it sound very simple, but that's the key. And I've heard arguments around where we're picking the wrong residents. They're all coming in higher acuity, or the community's not set up for it. Okay, so let's say that's a percentage, but I can tell you that that's a small percentage relative to the statistics that we see.
So are you seeing outliers in your population of communities where they're beating that 90-day number by significant numbers? Yes,
we've got communities that are, high teens, low 20s in terms of first 90 days. We've got other communities that are 35, 40%. Almost half the residents coming in are not staying for more than 90 days. And if you think about the implications of that on the sales side, is you're constantly trying to fill the beds. If you think about the implications of that from a operator or REIT side, is you're not able to make any NOI at all, simply because you're constantly trying to chase filling that bed or keeping your occupancy high.
Yeah, I am just the numbers are just. On one hand, they're shocking. On the other hand, they're so exciting because they're things that you can really take action on. And I look at on 100 units, right? If you can increase length of stay on average or median by 60 days, that's like an extra 8 or 10 move-ins every single year.
That's right.
You don't have the lead acquisition cost, you don't have the turnover cost, you don't have the chaos. I mean, it's just crazy
100%
stuff.
It's a KPI that we can all rally around, and everyone will win. The resident will win, the staff members will win, the operators will win, the capital partners and ownership groups will win. It is a single number that really binds everyone together. And if anything, if anyone is taking anything away from this conversation today, is that you can do something about it. You literally can move the dial. You just have to take an interest and push through the myth that length of stay is just something that's built into this industry. That's not the case.
Yeah, I love this so much. I'm going to sort of wrap up a little bit with that. So I talked about this gentleman who changed buildings, and I came over and I had lunch with him and met some of the leadership in this particular building, and they just didn't seem to care that much. And ultimately what you're talking about is, we've been talking about hard numbers, but those numbers, what's behind that is either staff that care or staff that don't. Management cares or management that doesn't. And when you start really caring about people, you care about your staff, they care about your residents and the residents' family. Wonderful transformational stuff happens, and you really are. What I love about what you're doing is you're helping people be able to actually look at this and say, oh man, I've got a problem here. Or in some cases, oh man, look at what we're doing. We are changing the world better than anybody else. And that is amazing. And I start thinking, I wonder how many people who are watching this, how many people who are in the industry go, I got no idea. And that's really the biggest beauty of what you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Steve.
And with that, we are about out of time. Thank you so much for watching. Abby will be back next week, and we're still working on the details, but we're hoping we're actually going to do this from the floor at the Senior Living Executive Conference in Phoenix. John, I'm looking forward to seeing you there in person and continuing this conversation. Hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate you.